Hi again, everyone. So I think we're going to start now. To recap, my name is Mathilde, and I am in charge of marketing here at Amity. We're really excited today about this webinar. The topic is choosing a CSM compensation plan. It's a great topic that a lot of people are very curious about. So we're really excited to have Kristen, who knows so much about the topic, here with us, and she's going to share some great insights with everyone. So we're really, really excited. Thank you so much for coming on this beautiful Wednesday afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. Before we begin, I'm just going to give everyone a few housekeeping rules. So feel free to join the conversation at any time on Twitter. We have a hashtag, which is CSM compensation. And don't hesitate to tag us at GetAmity and tag the Success League at TSL Customers, and we'd love to engage with you guys. Just so you know, we're doing a Q&A at the end, which is a great opportunity to get some insights from Kristen. So at any time, if you have a question, don't hesitate to put it down in the chat box at the bottom left corner of your screen, and we'll come to those questions and give you some answers at the end of the presentation. And as usual, we will be sending the slides to everyone at the end of the presentation, probably in the next 24 hours. So yeah, and now Kristen?
Hi everybody, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine. Does everyone hear everything okay? Yeah.
Perfect, yeah. Okay, sounds good. So thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Kristen Hare, and I'm the founder and CEO of a company called the Success League. We're a consulting firm that is based in San Francisco, California, and we work with organizations who want to improve their customer success efforts. And I'm really, really excited to share this topic with you. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I came up through the sales side of the organizations that I've worked for over the years and have gotten into customer success in the last 7 years. And so I'm very passionate about compensation plans, and I'm excited to share this with you today. So just to kind of give you an idea of what we're going to be doing, we are going to talk about variable compensation and why you might want to think about that for your customer success team. We're going to go through 5 decisions that you need to make as you're deciding how you want to compensate your CSMs, and we're going to talk about how to make those decisions. We are going to do some math, and I know not everybody's really comfortable with math, but you have to be a little bit comfortable with math in a leadership role, so we're going to do a little tiny bit of math. And then we're going to talk about some alternatives to variable comp for those of you who are in the position where you can't maybe implement a variable comp plan at this point, or maybe even ever. And so we're going to talk about that as well. And then we are going to have Q&A at the end, and then we're going to be talking about some things about Amity as well. So from there, let's just move on. You've all read my bio if you signed up for this webinar, so I'm not going to get into that in depth, but basically here's why I think you should listen to me about compensation. So as a sales leader and recently as a customer success leader, I have designed and executed a lot of compensation plans over the years. And it's fun for me. I completely nerd out over this topic. I love to talk about the intersection and think about the intersection of compensation and human behavior and motivation. It's interesting to me. And so I've done some stuff with my MBA on compensation. I read a lot about compensation. One thing I will recommend if you are interested in exploring this topic in more depth, the Harvard Business Review has a collection of articles about compensation, and there's some really interesting things in there. There's actually this one series of articles where these two guys argue back and forth about whether variable compensation actually works or not. You can get really nerdy about it if you want to, but that's a really great set of articles about compensation, and especially about variable compensation, that I would really recommend. I personally fall on the side of I believe in variable compensation. I think if you look at organizations where variable compensation did not work particularly well, Wells Fargo, cough, cough, that is largely because it was executed very poorly. I think variable comp success always comes down to the execution, and if you don't communicate it well or you don't put the plan together well, it's going to fail. And so we're going to talk about how you can create a plan that's very well executed today. I like to share a little bit about my life whenever I present because there's things that I'm passionate about outside of just compensation. My family is here. I have a daughter and a husband. My dog. I also like wine. I travel a lot. I have a Mini Cooper. I dance. I'm actually in a dance class on Saturdays with my mom, who is 70, and my daughter, who is 12. And so we all take dance together, which is really fun. And then I am a part-time momager for my daughter, who is trying to be an actress and a model. So that is what I do outside of just nerding out about compensation plans. So let's go on. So variable compensation. There's a lot of discussion in the customer success community about, variable compensation, whether that should be a part of what CSMs, have as a part of their overall package. And here's why I think variable compensation works for customer success teams. So in general, people have lots of different things to focus on. If you think about probably what many of you are doing right now while you're listening to me is multitasking. You're checking your email and you're looking at your phone. I wish you weren't, but you probably are. And so you have a lot of stuff you're trying to do and you're multitasking during your day. We as humans tend to focus on the things that are urgent. So if your phone rings, that's the first thing you're going to pay attention to. And if you get an email, that's also going to be something that you pay attention to right away typically. So if you think about that, that's just us as people. CSMs in particular have lots of things to focus on as well. And so when they're at work, they've got email coming in. They've got calls coming in. They have meetings that are scheduled internally. They have meetings with their clients scheduled. They're trying to do career development on the side that ends up getting backburnered a lot of the time. They're doing some selling. They're doing proactive outreach. And what happens is the things that feel really urgent, like phone calls and emails, tend to float to the top, and it starts to make CSMs be very reactive instead of proactive. CSMs are trying, really the whole idea behind the role of a CSM is to be a proactive contributor who can reach out to clients and help them become successful. And so given that that's the goal of that role, and that they also have lots of things they have to focus on during the day, it's important to have a way to kind of help them choose the things that are important for their role as well as aligned with the goals of the organization. And so this is really the only slide I'm going to read through because I think it's important for you to kind of understand my perspective and my logic on why I think variable comp works for CSMs. Two things I hear from people when I hear back on this. One is, well, that's just their job, and they get paid a salary to do their job. So why should they get paid extra? And so, yes, they do get paid to do a job, and part of that job is prioritizing their time. But the reality is that, this behavior still happens, refer to number 3 up here, and they get distracted really easily. And you as a manager can't be sitting there babysitting them the whole time and micromanaging them. And so variable compensation is a way for you to keep the priorities that they have top of mind without having to sit there and help them prioritize as they go through their day. Another argument that I hear from people is, well, the CSMs don't sell. And I would argue back that, yes, they do. Even if they're not selling a thing for money, they're still selling things that impact your revenue as an organization very heavily. They're persuading people to adopt product. That can make that client more sticky, which keeps them around, which produces revenue for your company. Anything they're doing to persuade the client to do what you want them to do is effectively selling. And so they are selling. We're going to talk about how there's kind of a scale in terms of variable compensation, that if they look more like a support person, maybe less variable. If they look more like a salesperson in terms of their role, maybe there's more variable. So we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I do think that CSMs are, in fact, always selling. They may not be selling something for money, but they're always selling, persuading, and doing that kind of work. And so it does make sense to me that they have variable compensation. Okay, so moving on. There's 5 decisions that you need to make as you're thinking through a structure for your CSM compensation plan. So we're going to talk through those 5 decisions, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go on to how I like to build plans for my team, so you can kind of learn that process. The first decision that you have to make is really, what should their total compensation be? You have to make this decision whether or not you're going to pay them any variable comp. So what people often do is kind of rely on, what other people in the organization make, or, what somebody on your executive team kind of thinks the compensation should be for that person. You really need to go to an outside source. It helps to refer to independent sources because it can help make sure that the overall compensation plan that you're putting in place is fair. And as you go back to your employees and you present this plan to them, you want them to understand that it's fair and that you put thought into it and that you got the data, from an independent source. The reality is people do talk about their compensation plans. They shouldn't, but they do. And so you always want to make sure that whatever you're doing in terms of compensation is fair. So I highly recommend PayScale. Other organizations I've worked for in the past have used salary.com. There are other tools that are out there. It varies by region. So depending on where you're located in the world, find one that works for you, but always refer to a third party. So that's the first decision you need to make. The second decision you need to make is really what this presentation is all about, which is, are you going to have a variable component or not? So there's one main thing that I think needs to be your first deciding factor, and it's that is, do you have clear and measurable goals for your team? If you do not have clear goals, or your goals are there but they're sort of fuzzy, you should not worry about a variable compensation plan. You should be worried about having goals first. So make sure you've done that first and then think about a variable plan, because if you try to implement a variable compensation plan without really clear goals, 2 things are going to happen. One, and I'm going to tell you 2 stories about this. One is people are going to get frustrated because they don't know how to earn the money that you've put out there for them. And so I have a story about a client of mine. I went in to help the CSM team with a playbook. And one of the CSMs that I first met when I was interviewing him, one of the first things he brought up is, our compensation plan is terrible. We have no idea how to earn the money that we're supposed to earn. And I was told we were going to earn X amount of money, and I have no idea how to get there. So, we kind of worked through that, and we did the playbook projects. But I have to let you guys know that that person is no longer with that organization, because that was enough of a problem for him that he decided that it wasn't worth him sticking around. And so you can really demoralize people if you don't have clear goals that get them from where they are right now to achieving the commission or bonus that you've put out there for them. The other thing that can happen is your company can waste a ton of money on ineffective plans. So, if there's no goals that are tied to the bonus plan, and let's say the bonus plan is annual, your people can actually forget about the plans. I had this come up once on one of my teams where I inherited a person and I inherited her compensation plan along with her. And I realized that there was an annual bonus, and I had one of my first conversations with this employee and said, hey, what's going on in terms of you achieving your bonus? Where are you? And she looked at me kind of blankly, and I said, yeah, your end of the year bonus. And she's like, oh, yeah, I forgot about that. And this was not an insignificant bonus. And what had happened is she had just been getting it every year, and it wasn't really tied to goals in any way. And so the company was just throwing that money away. Compensation plans and bonus plans are in place to drive behavior. And if they're not doing that, you're wasting money as a company. And so I can't emphasize this enough. No goals, no variable plans. It's not worth it. You're not going to achieve what you want to achieve. The second thing in terms of deciding whether you do a variable or not is, do you have a leadership team that's at all resistant to the idea of variable comp for your CSM team? If they're resistant to the point where you're fighting about whether or not this should be in place, don't do it. It's not worth trying to have that battle every time you want to go pay your people. And if you run into resistance with being able to pay out on something you've put in place, that's going to be very demoralizing for your team. So if you are running into that, there are alternatives for variable comp that we're going to talk about at the end of this presentation, and I would highly recommend that if, based on these criteria, a variable plan does not make sense for your team, you move on to some of those alternatives and put those in place first. So that's what I have to say about decision number 2. We're going to move on to decision number 3. So once you've decided that, yes, you do in fact want to have a variable and you have those pieces in place, then you need to decide what percentage of the overall compensation should be salary versus variable. And so this is how I think about it. I think about it on a spectrum. So if the role is closer to a selling type of a role, there should be more variable associated with it. And again, selling isn't just selling something for money. It's persuading people to adopt features or convincing clients to stick around. Those are things that are valuable in terms of revenue to your organization and should have some variable comp associated with them. Think about these sales-oriented goals as being proactive role. So if the role is more proactive on the customer success team, it should have more of a percentage associated with a variable. I see that being 30% typically for CSMs that are in a selling type of a role. On the other end of the spectrum is support-oriented goals. And so this is things like delivering services or onboarding or support. In those kinds of roles, there should really be less variable. Think of those as more reactive roles. You have both of these kind of roles likely on your CSM team, so you need to decide where on the spectrum does your team lie that you're trying to build a variable plan for. Once you've figured that out, you probably will end up with a variable somewhere in the 10% to 30% range. 50% I would say is probably the maximum for a CSM, and that would have to be a pretty heavy selling role. It's more common to see 50% salary, 50% variable in a salesperson type of a role. I wouldn't go beyond that. I also do think that you can drop down to salary only and be just fine if you supplement that with some of the alternatives we're going to talk about at the end. So that's your third decision you need to make. From there, you need to decide how do you want this variable compensation plan to show up. So there's really two main things. There's commission and there's bonuses. And the factors that you need to think about when you're trying to decide between these two is, first, do you have quantitative or revenue type goals, or do you have more qualitative goals? If the goals are quantitative in nature, or they're linked very clearly to revenue, commission makes more sense. If they're qualitative, bonuses typically make more sense. Both of them still need to be SMART goals. They need to be measurable. But you can have qualitative goals work really well in a bonus type structure. Then you want to think about, is it an individual goal or is it a team goal? Team goals really only work with bonuses. Commission, if you want to do that, it really does need to be tied to the individual. Then think about, are these short-term goals or long-term goals? Commission is typically tied to short-term goals, like sell X this month or sell Y over the course of the quarter. So those are shorter-term goals, but the program is typically longer. So the program will last all year, or the program will last, indefinitely. On the other side, longer-term goals like, hey, we want to improve our customer satisfaction rate by 5% over the course of the year, that might be better as a bonus type plan. You can do short-term goals as a bonus. It's just a little tougher because the payout is typically longer for a bonus plan. And then think about whether it's an ongoing program or if it's a program that's changing frequently. If it's changing frequently, it's a lot easier to tackle it with a bonus. If it's an ongoing program, it's easier to tackle it with commission. We're going to get into some examples here in a minute. One thing I will say is that most of the success teams I've led have had a combination of the two. So there's a part of their variable comp that's related to commission and a part that's related to a bonus. So it's completely okay to mix these up. You just want to make sure that you tie the goals to one or the other of these two things. And we're going to look at an example in a minute, as I mentioned. So that's the number 4 decision that you need to make. The 5th decision that you need to make is really how often do you want to pay this out? And this is really kind of related to 2 potential constraints. And I've run into both of these constraints in different companies I've worked for and different companies I've consulted for. One constraint can be company rules. So your organization may have a rule that says, hey, we only pay out quarterly or we only pay out annually. And if you're stuck with that, you're stuck with it, and you're just going to have to work with what you've got. Hopefully it's not so strict because ideally you want to tie the timing of the goals to the timing of the payout. The other constraint that I've often run into is just administrative bandwidth. If you don't have a system in place for calculating some of this stuff, it can be really manual, and if you have a really large team, that can get cumbersome. And so you do want to kind of think about, the fact that somebody is going to have to decide, did people achieve their goals or not, and actually pay them, figure out how much to pay them, and then pay them. And so that can get a little cumbersome potentially if you're trying to do it monthly. It really depends on your organization and the resources that you have. So keeping in mind those 2 constraints might be in place. What would be ideal is if you always have the payout as soon as possible as it relates to goals. So for example, if you have a goal of selling X number of training sessions a month, ideally you would want to be paying that out at the end of the month because it's very motivating for people to receive a reward shortly after they've done the thing that you want them to do. And so think about that. Think about your constraints. I've put on the slide, which you're all going to get after the session, some ways to think about, which kind of payout you should consider. But I'll let you figure that out, and you can ask me some questions about that at the end if you have specific examples. So what we're going to move on to next is, so you've made these 5 decisions. What do you do with that? And how do you create something that you can go to your finance team with or go to your HR team with or go back to your team with that makes sense? And how do you figure out, how do you get from these decisions to, say, a 2% commission plan for your team? So I'm going to talk you through that next, and that's the math part of this presentation. So don't be scared. I will say that if you're not good at spreadsheets and you're a leader of a customer success team, that's something you really need to work on. You have to be good at spreadsheets to be a good leader because you have to engage with your finance team, and that's the language they speak. So if you're not good at spreadsheets, I would suggest taking a class or 2 on lynda.com. They have really good, very inexpensive options for that. And just take a spreadsheet class or 2, and it's going to help you a lot with this, but with lots of other stuff you need to engage with your finance team on. So what you're going to do is you're basically going to just create a format that you like. This is a format that I like, so you're going to get my format. You'll be able to refer back to this afterwards. And you just are really going to plug in all those decisions you made. So you need to plug in total comp. That was your first decision you made. Your second and third decision were, do you want variable comp? And in this example, we're going to assume yes. And then what should the percentage of that be out of the total comp? And I'm just using some nice round numbers to make this easy. But basically, if you have a person with $100,000 total comp and you want them to have 20% commission or 20% variable, that variable amount that you're targeting is $20,000. So that makes sense. Then you want to put some things on here that are related to the goals that you have. So, you might want to put something like how many clients are assigned to that rep, if you have details like average renewal agreement or how much a training program costs. Anything that you're going to need for the calculations we're going to do in a minute, you want to make sure you lay those out here as well. And then the last thing that you're going to do is really look at the goals. So you're listing out your goals here. So this particular rep has a goal of maintaining a 90% monthly renewal rate for their 200 clients. They have a goal of booking 25 free training packages each quarter this year. And they have a goal of increasing team satisfaction rate to 95% this quarter. So that's a team goal. So the customer satisfaction rate for the team. I've decided in this case that this first one should be a commission and the second two should be bonuses. And that's, based on me looking at those criteria I just laid out for you and kind of making that call about which things are going to be most effective for these different goals. And then I also had to make decision number 5, which is should these be paid out monthly or quarterly? And I made the decision that this first one, since this is going to be most of the compensation this rep gets, is going to be paid out monthly, and then these other two will be paid out on a quarterly basis because that ties to the goals. So think about just putting everything on a spreadsheet, making it in some sort of pretty format that you like, that's easy for you to read. You want to make sure that I like to use borders on Excel because I think it helps people be able to view what you've put on the Excel spreadsheet a little bit more easily. And make sure you weight the goals. That's going to be important as we get into the calculation. One thing I do want to call out here is that sometimes the bonus and commission choice isn't super obvious. And I think the second example here of the book 25 free training packages each quarter this year, you could argue that that maybe should be commissionable because even though they're free, presumably that goal is in place because it drives some sort of revenue-related thing, like people sticking around. So, you could argue that that could be commissionable. It's certainly concrete enough and, quantitative enough to be a commission-based goal. In this case, I chose to make it a bonus because I already have a quarterly bonus in the satisfaction rate goal, and it's easier just to lump the two together. So there's a little bit of an art to this as well as the math and science. So you want to just kind of consider that. Okay, we're going to go on. Julie sent in a question. I think this next slide might clear that up for you. So if not, we can get to it at the questions at the end. So from here, what you're going to do is you're going to calculate targets and commission rates, and this is where the math comes in. Now, ordinarily, I would not lay it out this way. This is laid out this way so that it's easier for you guys to see it as a presentation. Ideally, you would want each of these things to have their own section. And what you're going to do is you're just going to tackle the goals, goal by goal, and kind of calculate out what should be the breakdown for that person to achieve that goal. And so in the case of the renewal commission, if we're targeting for them to earn $14,000 if they're hitting their 90% renewal rate, that means we're after a monthly target of $1,167 for that rep, if they're on target. Now, of course, in reality, what's going to happen is some months they're going to overachieve and some months they're going to underachieve. We just want to do averages because we're just doing a plan right now. So 200 clients divided by 12 months times the 90% renewal rate times that $5,000 average renewal size equals $75,000. So that's the amount of revenue that we're trying to have them renew every month. They have a $1,167 commission target. You divide that by the amount of revenue, and you come to 2%. It's a little below 2%. We round up. So it's a 2% commission plan. So on every customer they renew, they earn 2%. So this is a really simple one. You can get elaborate. I'm going to talk about why you shouldn't get elaborate in a few minutes, but that's a very simple calculation for how to arrive at a commission percentage. Training packages, that was the next one. So this is a little bit easier. This is a bonus. So based on that $20,000, we had said 20% of it should be related to these training packages. So that's $4,000 a year we're targeting. We're doing this one quarterly, so you divide it by 4 for the quarters. And then if they are targeting 25 training packages per quarter, You put 25 into 1,000, and you basically get $40 per training package. Now, for bonuses, it's okay to cap your bonuses, and that's what I'm doing here. So I'm saying they can earn that up till they hit 1,000, and then they can't earn any more. With commission, you never, ever want to cap commission. Commission should always be uncapped. If you feel like that makes you uncomfortable, or if that makes your finance team uncomfortable, revert to a bonus and put a cap on it. But the idea behind commission is if they sell it, they earn money. And the reason that you only commission on things that are directly tied to revenue is because you want it to be easy to demonstrate that, hey, the more money the company makes, the more money the rep makes. It's not like the rep is just making an indefinite amount of money that doesn't come back to the company. So you never want to cap commission. It's very demoralizing for your team that's selling. So last goal on here is customer satisfaction goal, and that we had said was 10%, so that's $2,000 a year. That was also going to be measured quarterly, so that's $500 a quarter. And this is an all or nothing goal. So they either hit that 93% client satisfaction, or 95% client satisfaction rate, or they did not, is the way that I have it set up here. You could, if you feel like there are some outside influences that might impact the success of your team, like your product maybe not performing as well as you had hoped, or there being a big giant bug that comes in mid-quarter, you could do kind of a sliding scale on that type of a bonus. I personally don't like sliding scales except for if there are outside influences. I believe that you either achieve your goals or you don't. And I think it makes it a lot more concrete and a lot more of something that your team is striving for if you make it all or nothing. So that is more math, and we have one more math slide. So hang in there with me if this is the struggle for you. We're going to go take a look at what you do next. So you figured out what your target is. I'm going to flip back here. So you're targeting these monthly and quarterly targets on this more math slide. The last slide on math is a breakdown of what a typical rep should make on this plan, what a low-performing rep should make on this plan, and what a high-performing rep should make on this plan. Lots of people skip doing this step when they're creating compensation plans, but I think it's really important for two reasons. One, this kind of analysis can really help your finance team get on board with the fact that if you have a commission plan and your commission plan is uncapped, you don't expect your rep to be making $200,000 a year. It kind of puts some boundaries on reality and what a rep could actually achieve. And so that helps the finance team think about it, and that helps you get this approved. The other reason I like to do this is because I actually show this to the reps. I know not everybody believes in that level of transparency, but I think it's really important to do that, because if the rep is looking at this and saying, okay, great, on target, I'm making $99,000 a year. But I could earn up to $105,000 a year if I just achieve a little bit more. And it gives them some motivation. Or if I don't achieve, I'm going to be way down here at 88, and that doesn't feel good to me. One thing I will say to all of you is that low performers need to be managed out. You don't keep your low performers around. And so doing this kind of analysis assumes that this person is not going to be around for more than a quarter or two before you realize that they're not working out, and you actually move them off the team. So, this kind of analysis, you want to call that out to your finance team when you're presenting this to them. The other reason I like to do this analysis is because I uncover things. And one of the things I uncovered as I was creating this sample for you guys for this presentation is that this is really not a huge difference between a low performer and a high performer. And so it was worse than this when I was first building this model. And so it made me rethink what a low performer would need to be and what a high performer would need to be in order to make it enough difference between the three. And to be honest, I still don't really think that $5,000 here or $10,000 there is enough of a difference to drive significant behavior change. So I would probably go back to the drawing board on this sample and kind of rework those numbers a little bit and potentially change the percentage of commission that was able to be earned, especially for that renewal goal. So just keep in mind there's a little bit of an art to this, as well as the math and science. So we're going to have questions at the end. I know this is a lot to cover in a pretty short period of time and a lot of numbers, and so feel free to ask me questions about this when we get to the end, and I'll come back to these slides so I can talk it through. Last two slides I want to cover today are execution. And as I mentioned in the beginning, I really believe that bad variable plans are not inherently bad. They are executed really poorly, and that's why they don't work. And so you need to have excellent execution in order for your variable plans to work. And they need to be timed right. I've seen too many companies where the variable compensation plan doesn't get rolled out until it's halfway through the quarter that it applies to, and then you have people who've been working for half a quarter without that motivation, and then the second half of the quarter they're running to try to catch up to what you laid out there for goals. That doesn't accomplish anything other than frustrating everybody on your team. So before the goals are rolled out, you actually have to have this plan ready to go to. So think about potential side effects of the plan. Two things I like to ask myself is, will it cause them to neglect something else that you need them to do? So think about, what you could be taking them away from. And if you feel like that's important enough, make that part of the plan as well. You can always put little caveats in the plan to say things like, oh, and yes, we are assuming that you have called all 200 of your customers monthly. In order to achieve on this plan, you have to have done that first. So, you can build some of that into your plan. The other thing I always ask myself is, can they game the system? Have I built this in a thorough enough way that it prevents people from earning money without the company getting the value that you were after in the first place? So ask yourself those two things, and if there's things that come up as you're thinking it through, make sure you address those with your plan. My other thing that really annoys me about compensation plans is a lot of times they end up just being full of legalese. And legalese is just completely unnecessary. Sales reps aren't going to read it. CSMs aren't going to read it. Anybody who's in a frontline role is not going to read through all the legalese. None of us read the legalese, I'm guessing, unless you're kind of one of those rare people that really enjoys legal documents. You're not going to read the stuff when you sign up for things online, when you have to say, yeah, I accept all of those rules that you just laid out for me. We just check the little box so we can keep doing what we wanted to do. It's similar with sales reps or CSMs who are getting commission or bonus plans. They're not going to read through all of that stuff. And so if you write up a compensation plan, just write it in clear, normal language. It's still legally binding. It just doesn't have to be in all that confusing jargon. So avoid that. And then the last thing really is you have to communicate about this plan. You cannot communicate enough about the plans that you're rolling out. You need to tell them it's coming. You need to tell them that you have it ready to go. You need to take them through it in a team meeting. You need to take them through it in one-on-one meetings. You need to be available to answer questions for them afterwards that they maybe weren't comfortable asking in a group or hadn't thought of at the time. So you really want to make sure there's enough time before the goals and variable plan kick in for people to ask you questions and get their questions answered. That's going to contribute to the success of your program. And then throughout the term of the comp plan, you always want to be bringing this up in the one-on-one meetings that you have with your team. You should always be talking about goals and how they're doing against their goals and what's preventing them from hitting their goals and where they are in terms of their achievement of their variable comp plan. That's going to help keep that top of mind, and that will help you make sure that the plan is as successful as it possibly can be in driving the behavior you're after. So make sure you focus on really good execution. You can spend all your time coming up with a wonderful plan, but if you don't execute it well, it's going to fail. Last thing is, okay, what do you do if you're in a situation where variable compensation just does not make sense? Some of that stuff that I outlined at the beginning. So I just recently wrote a blog post on this. I will let you guys have at it on the blog post. If you need more details, you can go look at that. But I did want to call out two things here that I think are really cool. Contests are the favorite thing of mine that's on this list. They are really fun. They can be used to keep your team focused during times of the year that tend to be really distracting, like around the holidays or summer vacation. And it allows you to loop in other teams with what your team is doing. One contest that we did that I thought was really effective several companies ago was a contest called Shared Love. And the way that worked was the CSMs who were participating in the contest, if they hit a certain goal, and it was a daily goal, and they were the one that achieved the highest on that goal, they were the one that got to go up to a bulletin board. And we had a bunch of envelopes on the board. The envelopes were kind of like, it was around Valentine's Day, and so they were decorative, very pretty Valentine's-y looking envelopes. And inside the envelope, there was a thank you note that was blank and an envelope and 2 gift cards. One of the gift cards they kept for winning the contest, and the other gift card, which was an equivalent amount, they could give to somebody else in the organization who had helped them hit that goal for the day. And so it was a chance to kind of do some outreach to other teams in the company who helped with the goals that the CSM team was trying to achieve. And so it acknowledged the CSM, but it also acknowledged other people in the organization. Another thing that I've done in the past that was really successful for our organization is at one of the companies I worked for, our customer success team came up with a program called Project Odyssey. And Project Odyssey was a chance for any reps who had achieved their goals for the quarter to intern on Friday afternoon for another department within the company. These were frontline kind of entry-level roles, and it gave them a chance to try out working in marketing or try out working on the product team, and also helped those managers of those other teams get some stuff done that they needed help with. But it ended up being a wonderful feeder program for the company where people from the success team would graduate from the role that they were in and move into other parts of the organization. It was wonderful for them for their career development, but it also helped spread the joy of customer success across the rest of the organization because those people took the idea of serving customers with them when they moved. And so those are 2 ideas that I've tried in the past that have been really successful. All of these alternatives you can be very creative with. If you're one of those people that loves to do fun programs, you can kind of come up with all sorts of good things to do. But these are things that I would say can be motivating to your team and also help you drive the behavior you're after when you don't have variable compensation as an option. So hopefully this is helpful for those of you that are in that situation. So from here, I want to just let you know that now would be the time if you have questions to type them in the chat box. It's in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. We're going to go on and talk about a couple of other little things first, and then I'll come back to the questions. So start typing if you've got them. The last thing I really wanted to cover before we get into questions is the Success League is actually a league. So we named it that because I'm a huge fan of old spy movies and I'm a fan of superhero movies, and it kind of combined those 2 things. If you've ever seen The Italian Job, you know that my logo is kind of a riff on that. So anyway, there is a league at the Success League. So here's how you can join that. We have a newsletter. You can sign up at thesuccessleague.io/blog. You can follow us on at TSL Customers on Twitter, or follow the Success League on LinkedIn. And then if any of you need help with this kind of stuff, you can reach out to me. I do consulting, and I would love to help you, but I always do free consultations first. So if you even just have questions or you want to kind of explore the idea of what consulting could look like, I'd be happy to talk to you about what I do and what my team does. So from there, I think we're going to jump into talking about Amity a little bit. So I'll turn this over.
Thank you so much, Kristen. That was amazing. I see a lot of people already have questions, so I'm really excited to see what you have to say. Just a tiny bit about Amity. For those who don't know us, we are a customer success technology provider. We provide an open platform for CSM. And if you're interested in knowing a little bit more about us, you can go on our website and register for a public demo. So those are like webinars, and we just give you a tour and tell you a little bit more about us. And once you've attended, you get one of those awesome t-shirts. So just saying, they're pretty cool. And if you want an intro to Amity that is a little bit more personal and a little bit more specific to your business, if you go on that same website, on our website, you can click on Request a Demo, and you can set up a call with one of our experts and just get to chat with them, see if we're a good fit, if we could help you out in any way. So yeah, now maybe we can move on to the questions. Kristen?
Sure. Okay, so I have a question from Vanessa, and she asked, while choosing a CSM compensation plan requires 5 decisions, what is the norm for a manager of customer success? Is it plus X? Are bonuses removed and all are on a flat salary? So I can tell you what I've seen, and I can tell you what I think it should be. So I see everything from it's just a flat salary and the salary is higher than what the CSMs make, all the way up to they're linked to a company executive bonus plan that is tied to things like, key performance indicators in the company like revenue and other key metrics. Churn is common. So I've seen everything. I think if you're a manager where you're the direct manager of the CSMs, you should have a variable plan. I mean, you should definitely have a salary. That salary should be higher than the one that your team makes probably, since you're a manager of people. But you should have a variable component. Your variable component will typically be on a longer timeline than those of your team. What I mean by that is if they're getting, maybe a monthly commission or a quarterly bonus, you as their manager would typically have a quarterly or annual type of plan, because the more you increase your position in the company, the more you need to shift your focus from focusing on tactical things to focusing on strategic things. And if you want to focus on strategic things, you need to have your sight line further down the road. And so with that, your bonus plan needs to match those kinds of more strategic, longer-term goals. And so it's really the same theory that I presented for the CSMs. It's that the longer-term your goals, the longer-term your variable comp plan should be. So hopefully that answers your question. And I think same person, you also asked, is there an industry standard to follow? What I have seen, first of all, I would refer back to question number 1, which is what should the total compensation be? That you can look up on salary.com or PayScale or any of those kinds of tools, and it will get specific to your geographic location and also to the role itself. So that's what I would refer you to. I think those third-party tools are great. In terms of a industry standard, I would say that the one that I keep running across is for the variable itself. It typically ranges between 10 and 30% for CSMs. So that's kind of the industry standard that's out there. Russ asked, what is the ideal total comp or range for a CSM? Again, I would refer you back to looking at a PayScale or looking at a salary.com. I live in the Bay Area, and so I have to say we skew really high here. What I see here, I can tell you, is people that are coming in with the total comp plans between $85,000 and $125,000. That is high for the country. I do think that $85,000 is not uncommon in other parts of the U.S. that I've seen. So I think if you're kind of thinking in that area, it's probably like 85, and it could go up if you're in maybe New York, Boston, Chicago, places like that. It could go down if you're in other parts of the country, depending on the geography. So hopefully that answers your question there. what is a typical base salary for oh, you guys all want to know about the really specific stuff. Sorry, Sharon, I'm going to just say, I would go check salary.com, and the way that I've used that when it's not a common role, because what it's going to ask you is all these questions about, what the title is and what, how many years of education they have and stuff like that. Put in things to the best of your knowledge, and then it'll give you some options and just sort of choose the thing that's closest to what you're trying to do. I really strongly believe that those third-party tools are important. They're important for you just to get an idea of scale and scope and geography. They're also important for you to be able to refer back to when you talk to your team, so they're not thinking you just made this up out of thin air. Okay, Jason, we have a renewal bonus paid out at 6 months and 12 months in the fiscal year. Why do you prefer a commission rather than a bonus? I think commission plans are great for things that are tied directly to revenue. And the reason for that is it's very motivating for people to be able to say, I closed a deal and I am going to get $100 because I closed that deal. And versus sort of having a bonus which is a little more vague and also capped, and also kind of at the 6 month or 12 month mark. It's further removed from the day-to-day of what they're doing, and so it's less likely to be immediately motivating. So, you probably, I'm assuming you have some goals that are kind of more monthly or quarterly. You always want to try to, as much as possible, get the term of your bonus or commission plan closer to the actual goal itself. So if the goal is monthly or quarterly, you want the payout to ideally be monthly or quarterly. Can you pull it off with a bonus? Yeah, sure. And if your company is really resistant to commissions, you might have to do that. It's just it can be less motivating because it's not as immediate in terms of gratification. So that's my answer to you on that. Let's see. Josh, maybe unfair question, but are there some factors or indicators that show you are probably ready as a company to implement a CSM compensation plan versus just a salary for services provided to customers? I think there are. I think it varies from company to company. To be totally candid with you, I think there's not uniform factors that I've seen. I think what it really boils down to is how open is your executive team to it. I think if you've hit the point, there's really kind of think about a company's life cycle in 3 stages. There's the startup stage, there's the growth stage, and there's the maturity stage, if you think about it that way. I think by the time you hit the growth stage, where what you're trying to do as an organization is really drive growth and drive scalable process, at that point you should have some variable comp in there because otherwise you're going to have a hard time scaling and driving the growth that you're after. So those earlier stage companies, you might be able to get away with not having some sort of plan like this, but it really does boil down to are your executives that you're going to talk to about it, are they ready to think about the idea of having some budget carved out for some sort of variable for the CSM team? And that to me has been the biggest difference I've seen as I've gone out and talked to company over company about this. I hope that answers your question, Josh. Let's see, Angela. Oh, that was about the link. Yes, there will be a presentation. You will all get this. Okay, Angela, spinning off Vanessa's question, how have you seen variable comp for managers of CSMs versus a director or VP who manages those managers? Yes, back to kind of what I said before, I think the higher up you get in your organization, the more you are going to have longer-term variable comp plans that are more closely tied to the goals of the organization at a high level than the goals of your team or the goals of the individuals on your team. And so as you grow, and this has been true for me, I came into my career in sales, and I grew into a sales manager, and then I grew into a director, and then I grew into a VP, and then I grew into a VP that had customer success. And so it's kind of been a career progression, and now I'm a CEO. And so, as that happens throughout your career, your goals are going to get larger in scope, and longer in terms of duration, and they're going to become more and more focused on strategy versus tactics. And so as that happens, your commission plan or your bonus plan is going to shift, and you probably will shift away from commission and more toward bonus as you grow in your career. And then the goals that that bonus is related to are going to become more related to the company's overall goals. I hope that answers your question. Let's see. If CSMs are service-oriented and not responsible for expansion wins, should we still consider a variable compensation plan? That was from Jean-Francois. And so I would say, yes, you should, as long as you still have strong goals for that team. I think you can always drive behavior with variable compensation plans. I think you would tend to skew the plan toward more of a bonus plan that's tied to your goals, and I think you would also want to skew toward having less variable comp as an overall percentage of your total comp. And let's see, Ellie. Based on your experience, hi Ellie. Based on your experience, how much does compensation weigh into retention? That's a great question. I gave you guys an example earlier where the variable compensation plan actually drove an employee away from the company. I think poorly executed variable comp plans can have that effect, and I've seen that happen quite a bit. I think compensation in general is becoming less and less a part of what retains people, although if it's not there, people won't start in the first place. So it's becoming more of a basic from the trends that I'm seeing. So it needs to be there. It needs to be at a certain level. It needs to be comparable to other organizations in the region. And if it's that, then the whole idea that comp is a retention tool kind of goes away, and people want to be engaged with the mission of the company, and people want to have learning and development opportunities. And so one book that I really love that I think does a great job of kind of presenting how I feel on this topic is a book called The 12 Elements of Great Managing. It's a book that the Gallup organization did a big study on a while back. And so I'd recommend reading that because there's an excellent chapter in there on how compensation ties in. So I think that's all I have time to answer questions for. I know there were a few more questions that I did not have a chance to get to. If you want to send me an email, I'm happy to tackle those, but I'm going to turn it over at this point. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Kristen. That was amazing. I think the level of engagement is fantastic. You made everything way clearer for everyone, I think, and we have so many questions. So yeah, if Kristen didn't get to answer your question, send them an email at the Success Lead email address, and I'm sure they'd love to help you. So right before we go, I know it's 2, but our upcoming webinar will be in 2 weeks. It will be with our CEO and founder, Paul Phillips, about the 10 strategies for scaling customer success. And we have 2 times, 7 a.m. Is more convenient for our friends over in Europe because of the time difference. So yeah, the registration page will be up by the end of the day. So follow us on Twitter or on LinkedIn, and you'll be able to sign up very shortly. And thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you so much for being so engaged. And thank you so much, Kristen. So much knowledge, so great. I'm sure everyone's incredibly happy. We're getting really great feedback in the chat box. So yeah, have a wonderful Wednesday, everyone, and thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, everybody.